Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the July community program. And today I wanted to cover a little bit more on the cranial nerves and the importance of the vagus. And I've got some really exciting information for you. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. And as ever, we'll go through what came up with the last session where I introduced the polyvagal theory and I looked at the importance of the vagus nerve in explaining some of the myriad symptoms that people experience. I introduced the idea that the health sector, the health service, and the medical model is based on an understanding of what's called the biomolecular model, which is it's about physical symptoms being based in the tissue in which they originate due to, biochemistry, biochemical imbalances. But there's no overarching understanding of what causes all the different symptoms in all the different parts of the body. And so we're a bag of symptoms, and everyone is treated symptomatically. Each symptom has its own solution rather than seeing the overall driving system that's beneath it all. And so luckily that model is becoming more and more obsolete in some ways. And one of the pioneers who I introduced you to last time was Dr. John Sarno, who looked in particular at chronic pain, and he found that chronic pain was unrelated to the tissue in which it occurred because it's controlled by your mind, it's controlled by the system, and in particular your unconscious, which is very driven by your emotions. So we need to kind of change this model and give a much broader context for why people get so many different symptoms. And so the current model can't explain why the symptoms show up or why they move, why they change in intensity or move around the body, or you start with one set of symptoms and it morphs into something else. And I think not since Stephen Porges came across what he called the polyvagal theory, the idea that there's not just one vagus nerve, it's not like a switch of sympathetic and parasympathetic. There are two vagus nerves. There's the dorsal lower one and the upper ventral one. And it's the balance, this hierarchical balance between these three systems, two parasympathetic and one sympathetic system, which kind of fine tunes the system. Okay, the upper vagus is the fine tuning one. And CFSME is a syndrome, it's a collection of symptoms, it's not a thing. Unfortunately, when you try and isolate it as one thing in the biomolecular model, that's where it fails hugely to provide relief or anything that a person can deal with, because it just seems unexplained and uncertain, which is frightening. And if you understand that CFSME is a description, it's not a diagnosis, because there's no one thing as far as they understand that causes it, then you get stuck in fear. And you feel that the symptoms will never go away, which perpetuates the whole syndrome. I also went into a lot more detail with other medically unexplained symptoms that often accompany these chronic fatigue style illnesses. Things like vertigo, dizziness, and tinnitus, that ringing in the ears. I also went into a bit of detail about some of the even weirder symptoms that many people have. And I showed that these are all readily explainable by imbalances in the cranial and vagus nerve system and this inhibitory upper vagus, which sometimes doesn't come on properly. Because the system is hierarchical, it's not an on-off switch. If this ventral vagal doesn't come online due to the perception of threat, and that can be the illness itself, or it can be something that happened to trigger the illness, and it can be, of course, what happened to you in your past experience in childhood, then dysregulation and these varied symptoms are absolutely assured. You're not going to get away with this without symptoms, because the system cannot hold any longer into balance. And then I want to come this week and show you some of the more, detail of these cranial nerves and why, in some ways, it's worth considering them all together as a system rather than just the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the most well known. It's the 10th cranial nerve. By the way, these are numbered in Roman numerals for reasons best known to whoever designed this system. But we've got 1 to 11, and the vagus is the 10th. But you'll see there are ones that control the optic nerve, the olfactory nerve, which is your smell, trigeminal, which is kind of around the side of the face, often involved in Bell's palsy, glossopharyngeal, which is the swallow reflex, and hypoglossal around the larynx and pharynx. Accessory nerve, these are interesting. The SCM, your sternocleidomastoid muscle, and your trapezius muscle at the back here. Very involved in breath when you're tense. They help to raise your lungs to breathe if you're not breathing from your belly. And so when you're stressed, the accessory nerves are often become very tight and locked in, and that can trigger a lot of these other nerves. The middle ear, this controls your hearing, the sensitivity of your hearing, the vestibulocochlear nerve, your facial nerves, and 3 different nerves that control eye movements. And I thought that was very interesting, as I'll go into detail here in a moment. So the 10th cranial nerve and the other cranial nerves need to be thought of as a system. So the other important nerves, I've been through them, but I think it's worth grouping some of them. Those eye movement ones, the 3rd, the 5th, 4th, and the 6th, may explain why eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is where we move the eyes left to right while feeling certain feelings and allowing certain emotions, may actually rebalance the whole system, because there are 3 of them, and you're stimulating them very directly. And there are a lot of other therapies that use eye movements as well. In fact, the basic exercise, which Stanley Rosenberg talks about, and it's his book I'm largely using in these presentations. He uses an eye movement where you go to the right, you hold it for as long as you need to until you get a response, which will be either a yawn or a sigh, something autonomic that will just release. And it can be different both sides, but as soon as you get that response, move back to the center and then do the left. You're holding your cranium with linked fingers, and ideally you're doing this lying down because you need the weight against your hands. You can do it sat up when you get really expert, and one of our contributors who's done it a lot said it gets easier and quicker the more you do it, so it's cumulative. Okay, so that's Stanley Rosenberg's basic exercise, is one of the self-help tools, but there are very many others. There's ear wiggling, tapping, of course, which stimulates the nerve endings on the head, neck, and face. The VU exercise, which was Peter Levine's contribution, and that's vibratory in the muscles and nerves around the neck. So there's lots of things you can do. These 3, the trigeminal, the facial, and the glossopharyngeal, I consider a very important grouping. I'll show you in a moment why. The 8th is the auditory nerve, facilitates hearing, okay, because it helps to control the tension in those 3 bones that transmit the sound signal in your middle ear. Very important in how you listen. And in fact, we were talking afterwards that one of the first symptoms that 2 of us, myself and one other person, experienced was a difficulty in listening to music and being able to appreciate music, because suddenly everything is jangly, nothing is in balance, everything feels painful. And that explains kind of why that's happening, is because the system has gone out of balance and can no longer dampen those sounds. The accessory nerve linked to the neck muscles. Now, this is also very interesting because we know that the back neck muscles are often get very, very tight in people who are tense, and that affects your breath. But it also can give you symptoms of dizziness, migraines, because you're restricting the blood flow by those muscles, then affect the muscles underneath the occipitals, which are very dense and tight muscles beneath these bigger muscles. And that's what constricts the nerves and the blood flow into the brain, and often leads to, these migraine symptoms and dizzy spells and all sorts of things. The 12th, the hypoglossal nerve, that's all about mastication. And in fact, you can get problems with jaw. I've often had jaw issues myself, where things click when you're eating and feel quite uncomfortable. And I've even had my jaw sort of go out of alignment once for reasons that were completely unexplained, but now make sense to me. All of this, of course, does help to explain tinnitus, the ringing in the ears, where everything's tense and nothing's filtering properly, and autism, which is all about social engagement and being able to connect with others in a safe way. So I think we need to understand that this all is about the ventral vagal functioning in regulating autonomic function. Okay, so that diagram is a really important one, and it's sort of a ladder basically to illustrate the fact it's hierarchical. This is the social engagement system. The ventral vagal is often also called the social engagement system, because its basic idea, its function, is to promote rest and restitution and ensure optimal physical and emotional health through social bonding, through friendship, cooperation, mutual support. Its original function, it's a primate development for parent-child bonding, but in adulthood, it also enables us to have loving and deeply connected relationships. So when we are socially engaged, you can tell if someone's socially engaged because their facial movements are wide and broad. There's lots of movement, but we can also be creative and positive and productive and happy. People who don't have that often have very still faces, are not socially engaged. It's a very big clue that their social engagement system isn't working. So if we have a well-functioning nervous system with this happening in the right fine-tuning kind of hierarchical way, we can naturally meet a new situation with openness, trust, and positive expectation. So threats don't seem so bad. They seem you can overcome them. There's always someone to help. You feel that you're going to be okay. And pro-social behavior, reaching out for support, getting cooperative help, is usually enough for most people to overcome threat, but not always. And if that system doesn't work, then because it's our most recent evolutionary development, this one, if that doesn't work, then it's often the first one to be abandoned, because we then have to go to a sort of amber alert sympathetic system or a red alert dorsal vagal shutdown. So this is so important for feeling good in your world and functioning well physiologically, and is often missing, as I've said, in autism and severe dissociation, which many of us have. I've suffered dissociative episodes, and I know one of our attendees has also experienced them on and off. Luckily, not so much now. She's reporting a huge change in that, actually, and is getting a different symptom instead. She said that she suddenly got vertigo rather than dissociation, and I explained the symptom imperative is your mind is perfectly capable of giving you any range of symptoms if it deems them to be distracting enough for you to avoid what emotions are underneath that you're not looking at. So it's a bizarre fluid system. It can do all sorts of weird things, but if we understand that it's this polyvagal system that's really controlling all of it, I think we're less in fear, we're less in reactivity, and we have something we can do about it. Somebody was saying she found difficulty also with she couldn't drive, and she couldn't even be in a car because everything seemed too fast. She couldn't process properly. And again, that's an autonomic dysfunction. I also shared that, I had problems being able to concentrate on voices, because that's all about the balancing of this system as well, as I'll show you in a moment. And basically, it starts to explain what we're experiencing, not as a separate symptom that's divorced from everything else. Oh, here's another thing and another thing and another thing. These are understandable reactions of a mind body that's out of alignment. And now the four cranial nerves that I thought were really interesting, and I called them the Fab Four. This is my, apologies to the Beatles, but it was just my way of gathering them together. They have odd numbers, so from 5, 7, 9, and actually that's not right, I don't think, and 11. Yeah, forget the X, because that's the vagus nerve. So you've got the four cranial nerves and the vagus nerve together. They're not only picking up information from this part of you, they're also going down, and the vagus is going down into your viscera as well, and feeding back information from your internal organs. So it's telling you, are you safe? Are you threatened or in mortal danger? Does your body feel healthy, or is there an imbalance, pain, dysfunction, or illness? So illness then can contribute to this feedback loop, which says something's wrong, something's wrong. If we're safe and healthy, these nerves will facilitate the desirable state of social engagement, but they get very triggered when we're ill, and particularly if we have a sensitized nervous system to start with. And, if something's been going on in our lives from the past that has already been embedded in the system, the illness may be the final straw. And here's an interesting fact, that reducing the volume of sounds above and below the frequency of the human voice is the function of the stapedius muscle, which is innervated by the 5th and the 7th cranial nerves. And it's designed to allow a baby to more clearly hear her mother's voice. She has to identify the mother for safety reasons, for nutrients, for love, for care. But if that goes out of alignment, then you're going to be easily disturbed by background noises. And your stapedius muscle might not be doing its job properly of reducing the volume of the low frequency sounds, making it hard for you to hear what someone else is saying in a noisy room. And this really explained for me why I still struggle sometimes with going into noisy restaurants where lots of people are talking. And if I try and concentrate on what someone is saying next to me, I lose everything else, and I can't function. And sometimes I can't hear them because my brain isn't filtering out the extraneous noises. And so I think it's worth considering the vagus nerve as a collection of nerves, really. Not we have to think of the vagus and the cranial nerves together, because one is not separate. They all impact the other. And if one branch of our cranial nerves is under direct physical pressure for whatever reason, tight muscles, misalignment in the jaw or the head or the neck, not only that branch, but other branches of that nerve and other nerves can become dysfunctional, because they're all talking to each other. They're all in a balanced system. So as an example, Stanley Rosenberg gives this example: a dislocation between the sphenoid and palatine bones in your skull can result in dysfunction of the nerves to the face and middle ear. And this is enough to block the entire social engagement system. Okay, so and again, one of our contributors talked about this, that also there are other potential imbalances that can happen in the back of the neck and in the bones around the head, neck, and jaw. And it really destroys your sense of peace. It can create all sorts of weird symptoms. It's really disabling. And funnily enough, whiplash can cause these imbalances as well. So that's often where some people's symptoms really begin. They feel anxious and disorientated. So you have to consider the vagus as many nerves, I think, which all interact, and that the Fab Four, as I called them, are probably the most important as well. They explain a lot of the migraines which can often be because of this, the upper bones of our vertebrae, the atlas and the axis, if they become disconnected or displaced relative to each other, can cause a lot of symptomology. And I was saying that there's a whole branch of craniosacral work that works just with those two bones alone. And realignment of them is actually a relatively simple process. It takes, you really need to know what you're doing. You can't do it yourself. It needs to be done by a practitioner. And sometimes it might need several goes to really do it properly, but it has huge effects. So the thing to understand is the imbalance can be triggered by different reasons of pressure on the nerves. And if there is inadequate ventral vagal function, then therapeutic interventions that try and, click your nerves, click your bones back and readjust the nerves, as some chiropractic does, may not work. You need to really get the ventral vagal working first. This is Stanley Rosenberg's idea. And he says you can actually check by looking in the mouth, because you can see at the back of the mouth where the tonsils are. You can check whether it's a perfect arch or whether one side is drooped relative to the other, because of course, although I'm considering the vagus nerve as being one, and there are left and the right are often different. Okay, so it's bilateral. And getting that balanced first before you then tackle the other cranial nerves might be the way to go. And so it has massive implications for not just therapy, but for treatment generally, and for doctors' surgeries and anybody that works with the human body or disease states. So anyway, I thought that was really fascinating information. Adjust a date for your diary. Our next session will be Wednesday, the 3rd of September. We're not having an August meeting. It's holiday time. I want to have a break, and I know other people like to as well. So we're going to all come back in September. You can still find me on my YouTube. You can find my books as ever, and the Nervous System Reset program, which has bundled the emotional audit together with 7 online sessions, is now happening. And we hope to relaunch that again towards the end of the year, but we're in our pilot phase at the moment. So we're still kind of learning how to best present this information. But thank you so much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing there. Wish you all happy holidays, and hope you enjoy your summer. I think that was all I wanted to cover today. Be curious. That was the final thing. If you get symptoms that you don't understand, be curious rather than afraid, because curiosity is the antidote to fear, because it takes you out of left brain fixity into right brain open awareness, and then you can start to maybe allow yourself to feel whatever it is you're not allowing yourself to feel. So look, it isn't easy, but it is simple. It's about being open to your experience and not trying to fight yourself. So there we are.